sometimes there's just no way to hold back the river. And in my project, I was holding back the river. Like I was on dry land, and I knew that there was something deeper. So the larger project is called Peaks and Valleys. And I think I had focused way more on the peaks than the valleys. And I think I had neglected to do a level of soul searching that I didn't think was necessary for this project. And like I said, I'm still working on it right now. Desert Rose, which has come out most recently, is part 1 of 4. I thought I was just doing an album, but I'm doing 4 albums. I'm doing a cycle, and I'm doing a whole visual world with it and everything. But there's just no way to hold back the river.
You're listening to the Freio Music Podcast. To the Freio Music Podcast.
My name is Alex Simon, and I make music under the name Tone Ranger.
And Alex, where were you born?
I was born in California, so I'm from Southern California, and spent the first 25, 26 years of my life there. Was up in the Bay Area for a bit as well for college, and kind of breaking into the music scene up there in Oakland, San Francisco, and moved out to New Mexico 6 years ago, which is where I live now.
Nice. And what was it that first got you interested in music?
Music itself really just kind of lured me in the way it does for anybody, the way it really does for anybody in the world. As far as making music, that's a whole different thing, but man, music is just always around. And as a young musician, you have a choice of whether you want to enter into the flow of understanding it more deeply and participating in it. I started on the clarinet when I was in 4th grade, and stuck with that for about 2 weeks. So that was my first participation right there. And I'm actually taking it back up right now. I've had about 3 lessons over 3 weeks. So I'm already doing better than I was.
All right.
And I was really pushed into, and willingly as well, but I'm 6'6". Like I went into sports. I went into basketball, went into volleyball. It's what I went to college for. It was always this kind of push and pull between being able to study music and training for that. And I finally, I know I'm skipping a lot of years here, but I finally hit a turning point in college when I was transferring schools. I had gone to UC San Diego, which is in California, for volleyball, to play on the team. And I decided to transfer to UC Berkeley, which was just my ideal. Like the whole free speech, free thought, something about the mystique of the Bay Area. My older brother went there, and whenever I would go, my parents would just drop me off at Amoeba Records. It's this like warehouse record shop that's absolutely endless what you can find there. And I would just spend 6 hours sifting through the dollar bin for the coolest looking records. And I probably didn't hear those for another couple years, but my music obsession, like when it really started turning obsession, was up there. And when I got into the school, I finally had to choose a major, and I chose music. And I hadn't really read music, hence the clarinet lessons. But I had gotten good at guitar, and I had played with a lot of people. I was good at jamming, good at improvisation, not good at all at reading. I had no knowledge of the staff, the treble clef, bass clef, musicianship, harmony. All of that was foreign to me, like reading, like the Russian language is foreign, and then you go in as like a Russian literature major. That's what I would describe it as. Like I'm immediately trying to decode Bach pieces, Beethoven pieces, these complex foundational pieces, and just having to work quadruple time to everybody else. But yeah, it got me to a point where I consider myself still to this day like a music academic. I still read music. I teach music. There was a big turning point in the college years, but yeah, man, early on, that was just the best thing to do outside of sports, and probably more than sports. I would go to the library, which just had this amazing CD collection. I don't know if people know that, or if it's even still relevant anymore, but libraries have thousands of CDs that you can check out for free. And like back in the day where there was like Napster and LimeWire and stuff like that, which is sketchy for so many reasons. But you could just get all of this music and put it on the computer, and there I was, like exploring the world of Japanese music or like Americana roots guitar music. That was a real fountain of exploration for me. I just explored wherever I could, and until it could finally coalesce into something that was like a life path.
Nice. And so what was it that inspired you to actually stick with it? Because obviously you mentioned that you could not read music, and suddenly you were expected to really understand in-depth pieces in the classical realm. But how were you able to persist and teach yourself in a way that probably wasn't being taught in the classroom? Because sometimes there's expectations that you already know things that you might not have had.
Yeah, there certainly were expectations. I mean, kids have been playing violin since they were 7 or younger. Everyone was a maestro at the piano. Everyone could at least read. I will say that. I was a good student. Like I knew how to study. I knew how to work. I had not applied it to that realm before, and I got challenged in a way that with math, with pre-calculus or something, because I didn't even go on to calculus. Like I didn't even want to get good at it. Music, I could see the value in getting good at it. There were some things that were like, okay, I don't know if I'm ever going to use this again. And I will say to anybody doing music education of any kind, you will and can use it again. It's all relevant. All of music education is relevant. It doesn't matter if you're learning on the bassoon. If you're learning guitar, you can transpose that bassoon knowledge to the guitar. You can transpose all of this into music production. You're learning how to hear better. You're learning how to understand and analyze music on the fly. I can listen to any song played anywhere and decode what's going on musically because the tools were just presented to me, and that was just alluring. Apart from the standards on myself to get good grades, it's like, these are the tools. Like, this is the code to understand all that good stuff. I mean, there is a percentage of music that is inexplicable. It's soul, it's spirit, it's maybe something that you can't academicize in any way, but the foundation you absolutely can. And yeah, I had just taken my musical curiosity that was always with me and was finally, thank God, in a formal institution to do it. I was at UC San Diego, as I had mentioned, and I took music classes the whole time. Like, I took introductory level classes, and that department, it's an incredible department, but they're so focused on the future of music. So people in like the postmodern composition era that are doing serial music, which is taking the 12-tone chromatic scale and playing it in a certain order, and there's like a mathematical reason that these notes are played in this order. Like I said, I'm no math student at all. So I needed to go into an institution that was teaching it from the beautiful Bachian, even before that, medieval Renaissance building blocks. And I mean, it's just one of those things where you build momentum, like you start getting good at it. And I remember I would always make these voice memos of me like jamming on a loop pedal with a guitar, and that would be my soundtrack for walking around Berkeley on the weekends or just whenever I wasn't in class. And I remember one day just being so excited that these were going to get better. Like, these were going to get, like, they were starting to get really good, but these are going to get like really, really good. And that pursuit will be with me for the rest of my life. I feel lucky that I'm not in a field that you can retire from. You never stop wanting to do it. The education becomes fun, and yes, it's work, but there's no better work that I could possibly do myself.
Yeah, well, that's great. So every weekend you would just record something new on the loop pedal and try and improve your skills, and then you started realizing that there was a trajectory that you were on of improvement.
You know, yeah. And I would hesitate to use the word skills because it's more of a deepening of musicality. And that's not exactly like how fast my fingers are moving to play a scale. It's more my sense of melody was getting stronger, and the harmonies were getting more interesting, and I could actually break apart the harmonies. And sometimes I would puzzle myself. I would have these note clusters, as you do when you loop anything, and wow, like that transcends what I'm learning in the classroom. And that was really a saving grace for me, is that yes, I'm getting my butt kicked by most people in class who have known this language their entire life as far as the notes go. But I'm building this world of creativity, and that is my own, and nobody can take that away from me. And not just like if I'm thinking competitively in those classes, which in an academic setting is pretty natural. Okay, there is this intangible thing that cannot be competed with. Maybe there are other sound worlds that other people are building, but mine is mine. And that gave me a strong sense of individuality and what I was there to do. Because in an academic music program, you think that the world is about the music academy. So maybe I'll go on to grad school. Maybe I'll just go get a master's and just try to go to the next academic hoop. And I had a harmony teacher who was an absolute drill sergeant. Like he made us good. Like you got embarrassed if you weren't good at harmony. And I mean, he encouraged me to look outside of the academy because there's something else going on. Like that's the chosen path. That's the passion path for some people. Some people are just born teachers. I love to teach, but I'm a born composer. I'm a born tinkerer. I'm a born sound explorer. And that's just when you ask how it was to feel really challenged by the work. And to look around and see everybody doing better. It's like the only person I'm trying to do better than in this domain is myself. And that came that was a real saving grace, I would say.
It sounds like you were able to break free from the standard path and also not get bogged down into, comparing yourself to other students who have had years or decades of extra training or additional background that you just didn't have. So once you decided that you were going to continue to explore sounds, how and when did Tone Ranger, the name, come about?
So Tone Ranger actually came about around that time. So this is about 11, 12 years ago. So when I got to Berkeley, I was super interested in the radio station, which just had this cool, musty, like they had 1,000 vinyl records in there, just this cool aura. And it was like in the basement of this building, but there were always people going through it, and the DJs were so cool. I mean, college radio is freaking excellent because you not only get the students that are on the cutting edge of the new music, but people from the community that just have this encyclopedic knowledge, and it's Berkeley. So they're nutters and they're like total music heads and like in these obscure ways. And especially what I really gravitated towards when I was there was this kind of folk bluegrass, like space grass is what it's called. It's like the most Berkeley thing possible when it comes to Americana. And I was getting deep into ambient music and electronic music at that time, and I trained to become a DJ, and I needed a DJ name, and Tone Ranger was just the most clever thing I could think of. And I was on from like 3 to 6 a.m., did all these training slots, and didn't go on to become a regular DJ. And I did not go on to use that name for like another 5 years. I was in bands, I was doing other things. I had a larger overarching project that didn't really need that name yet. It was when I moved to New Mexico 5-6 years ago that I picked the name back up because it finally fit where I was and what I was doing. I had always, like in that time that I was in Berkeley, I had this sound in mind, like a very Southwestern sound, and a huge curiosity about the Southwest and the cultures that have come here and the cultures that have been here. And it took a little while. It took longer. It took a good 5 years before I finally had the gumption and the invitation really to move out here. And so I did, and so the name Tone Ranger was fitting. I was doing at the beginning more ambient leaning, but getting into more of a house direction, and realizing that I could make this kind of, pardon the pun, like Adobe house, like a Southwestern style cool. house that I really wanted to hear. Like I think most musicians will say that they would love to hear the music that they're making. I mean, they don't want too much competition on their originality, but like I would love to hear music that's like a desert soundtrack as I'm driving through these areas of like open epic landscapes and canyons and everything. And there's some, I'm definitely influenced by some, but yeah, what I started to make didn't really exist. It certainly didn't exist in town. There was a great dance scene here, and there was an opening for someone who wasn't DJing, for someone who was playing music, and I was playing lap steel, and I was playing all these instruments. And Santa Fe, I mean, that's, man, to anybody starting out in music, it's nice to do it in a town where you can be a big fish in a small pond, because that's just the nature of a town of under 100,000 people. Is there's going to be active community members, there's going to be active artists. Meow Wolf, I mean, anybody listening, I'm sure that you guys know Meow Wolf. There are a ton of insanely creative artists, but there's a ton of opportunities too. even though Santa Fe stages aren't as big as Denver, and we don't have a Red Rocks necessarily, we do have a Santa Fe Opera. We do have a Lensic Theater. Like, we have successive stages that you can build up to. And at the beginning, I just played everywhere that I possibly could. I calculated it in the first year. I played 60 shows, just anywhere I possibly could, whether it was wanted or not. Usually 4% of the time it wasn't wanted, but you get those. But yeah, I mean, for like anyone that was having an opening, I bought some PA speakers and I just told them, I'll bring sound and let me just play in the corner. And that helped me develop a live triggering / live playing method that has stuck with me. That is like the way that I perform dance music.
Tell me about what live triggering means. I'm not familiar with that term.
So live triggering, I use this, what's called a MIDI controller called the Push 2. The Push 2 is the only reason that I could stomach going into Ableton. Ableton is like it's my favorite program on the planet, but it looks like kind of gray and gritty, like GRIDDY. It's just it's so in the box and so gritty, and I'm used, like, hey, if I'm taking these expansive vistas and trying to channel that through this like very digital computerized system, I need something tactile to help the composition process, and when I'm live, so that I'm not stuck in the computer when I'm live, I can use this thing called the Push to push buttons. It's colored, it's light up, it kind of triggers the synesthesia part of my brain that likes to have some sort of visual for sound. It's a really wonderful piece of gear that helps me feel musical when I'm launching dance songs.
I see. So it was a tool that you used to bring into the live setting something that may have been pre-recorded or designed or looped in the moment.
Yeah, I hope I'm not dispelling any kind of dirty secret, but electronic music, for those who don't know, is usually recorded beforehand. One guy on stage can't make all those sounds at the same time.
That's for sure.
So we do have to record some things in studio, and we do have to launch that somehow seamlessly. We got to blend DJ skills with a kind of what I like to do with the Push is a more musical approach to the DJ style. So there's also options on there to play with spatial effects like reverb. Like you can run the whole, like you have an output chain where you can put effects on it. You can kind of make it sound all choppy. You can make it sound spacious, like you're in a cathedral. There's all those kind of things that you can do. You can trigger synthesizers within Ableton. And if you're not an analog purist, which I'm about half and half, which makes me not a purist, but yeah, I mean, I can trigger digital synthesizers live, which has been amazing to have yet another tool to play live. I usually have a lap steel. Lap steel's a standard. I'll bring a guitar on. I'm starting to bring the clarinet on, and other things with a microphone. But yeah, it's a wonderful tool for playing live. Because if I'm not playing live, then I'm not as engaged as I need to be as a performer. That's being totally open and honest here. That's been a bit of a learning curve. I come from a performance tradition that was definitely ingrained in us at Berkeley. I studied classical guitar when I was there, and I've just been in bands. Like I was in bands before I got there. I was in bands after. So I'm just used to playing. I'm not used to having very much triggered except for like an Alan Watts spoken sample. So yeah, it's something that I am very much navigating, is how do I play more? Because when I play more, I'm in a joyous place and everybody can come with me for that. If I'm bored up there, if I'm just pressing buttons and not really engaged in what I'm doing, then like forget about the person at the head of the ship. It's like, where are we going? As the audience just doesn't really know what to respond to on a human level. Like they might still be able to dance, but I'm there because people need a human.
Yeah, and I feel there's something to be said about the live performance aspect, which is definitely more enjoyable from an audience perspective, but also gives you, the creator, the performer, flexibility on stage. You can change things up. You could speed it up. You can add extra notes. You can hold back where you want, and you might be able to feel out the audience or the night or your own emotions in a different, unique way than if it was just a stereo wave bounce and that's all you had.
Absolutely. I mean, how amped can you get just listening to your tracks over and over on stage, on the spot? Unless you're an incredible dancer and you're just there to dance to your own music, then you don't really have much of a chance of performing, I think. And that's very personal to me, and it's not universally true. So there's some damn good DJs in this town, and they put on some damn good parties, and they're DJs first. And if they produce, okay, they produce too. But for me, that's never how it was. Like I never came into this as a DJ wanting to learn about production. Well, yeah, just wanting to learn how to turn, how I could bring my musicality into it. I started off with the musicality, and now I'm honestly at a bit of a crossroads for how I make this a seriously fun thing to perform. And part of that is, I like getting into waters that I know almost nothing about and going pretty far from the shore. And that for me right now is video. Video is taking some of the load off of the solitary electronic music performer archetype, I guess. It's allowing me to present something much bigger than myself, or even just bigger than the recorded music itself, and the reliance on you as the audience dancing, and that being the metric of whether this is working, that being the energy exchange. Live visuals, because I come from a bit of a film background with my music as well. I've been scoring films for a while. That's where a lot of my joy and curiosity is at. And, it's going to be a process of bringing other musicians on and finding more ways to play in the moment. But the visuals are such an absolute challenge and blast to get up there, that it's, that's working for now. I'm playing at some drive-in theaters. It's not that I want to play with like a 7-foot screen behind me. It's that I want to play with like 70-foot screens and present this as if it's like a movie with a dance. With cool. There's a way that you can enter and participate in it, but it is telling a story, whether that's textural in moments or literal in other moments. That's what I'm aiming to do, is tell elemental stories on the screen. When you just have sound to present, like I'm used to that, and like I can honor that the sound is enough for a lot of people. But in terms of planting the seeds of big ideas, visuals can really help you do that in a way that's very real world. But film specifically can help you do that, can help you get across a point that's in the music that may be missed. Maybe there's lyrics that aren't super audible, but there's something on the screen that's reinforcing the lyrics, for example. My music tends to be less text lyrical. So in my case, it's presenting a color scheme. It's presenting the synesthetic world that I come from, that I make music from anyway. It gives me a grand canvas to do that on.
Now, when you are live and presenting the visual and audio experience, I imagine there's got to be some sort of trade-off between creating live visuals, meaning like in the moment you're going to change something, versus something that has been premeditated, and you, as you mentioned, like the color scheme. So there's obviously some sort of creative limitations that you're going to embrace for each song or each piece. So how do you manage it on stage, working to create audio in the moment and then also video in the moment? There's got to be some trade-offs as to what is live or created in the moment.
Yes. So I'm just a few into this. I'm maybe 3, maybe 4 theater-sized screen shows into this. And each one's a little bit different. Like, I'm learning with each one. But yeah, I mean, there are people who are VJ oriented, who just get this stuff and have thrown this stuff up on big screens. And I've been relying on some of them for help live. And we have discussed certain parameters, certain kind of effects for certain kind of songs. And hey, I mean, obviously there's some spontaneity that is taken out of something like track order in that case. That's at the moment. Who knows where this is gonna go? Like, who knows? I could foresee that if I'm touring with anybody over the next year or two, while I may still be going musically on my own, it's probably going to be a visual person. And it's probably somebody who can respond to what's going on and who knows the visual material inside and out. I am still looking for the person, and I'm throwing this out into the podcast sphere. If anybody knows a very creative VJ, those are the kind of people that I'm really looking for to bring it into a space where it can be improvisational and play. Yeah, I mean, right now it's like making a 90-minute movie each time I go up. So it's a lot. And
are you currently triggering some of that on stage? Is it synced to Ableton?
Because I'm so new into that world, I've kind of left that to back of house, front of house, whatever you want to call it, the projection booth to man that, because if sound's going wrong, I can fix it. If visuals are going wrong, that's kind of somebody else's job right now. So that is I cannot manipulate those live just yet, but the time will come where I think that'll be an option to hook in. But for a projector system, like, you do need quite a great distance, and my technical knowledge and research has not led me to a clear solution of how I can do both on stage. But that would be the goal. And the answer to the question, if it was a question of can you do Ableton and live visuals at the same time, technically yes. On a big projection screen, I'm not so sure, because if you were going pretty small and the projector was right there, no problem. You'd turn around and you'd see everything, or you'd have a monitor up there, you'd see everything, and it wouldn't be far from your computer, so you can make a hookup there. But I feel like I'm going maybe a little into the weeds.
Oh.
It could inspire people to take that into their own hands, because we can. Like, we have video tools available to us, and if you are creative and you're a musician, and you think about music as being like life and reflecting life, it's definitely possible, and it's a fun cross training is a fair way to put it, where that's influencing the music too, the visual process.
Definitely. And they're each building and enhancing each other, I feel, when it's done correctly. And it's great that you have that vision and that you have the will and the desire to create those custom visual experiences. And the drive-in theater sounds like the perfect place to be working on that. So that's cool. I do want to ask a few other questions about some of on the musical front, and that is, one in particular, how does a sound set a time and a location?
How does a sound set a time and a location? So is this a question about sort of geolocating in your brain when you hear a sound, like a sound can transport you to a place?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the Adobe House, and you mentioned times of the past, and I feel that when I listen to your music, it sets me into a time and a location, and I wonder, when you're creating that or making a song, and Palomino is one of them that really jumps out as like a very distinct song for me. But I'm curious, when you are creating those, do you imagine you are in that location and come up with sound? And if so, how do you shape the sound to fit that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm imagining a location, and I'm imagining being there when I'm in the studio, but I'm also there. Like, I live in New Mexico. It's really easy to get out to trails in any direction, and I spent some time in the Four Corners area, which, for whoever doesn't know that by name, it's the epic sandstone red rock cliffs that are in every John Wayne Western. It's like the Great American Desert is in those cliffs. And I spent a month recording in a van out there. And so, part of this is, it's not just imagining from the studio. It's not just going on a hike and being out there. It's also making things out there. Again, there are tools these days where you can bring recorders. You could even bring your synthesizer and some sort of Yeti charger or generator or something, and you can set up shop if you got enough shade. That's something I'd recommend. Don't underestimate the need for shade, because your computer's not going to breathe without it. I mean, these things are embedded in my mind, and when I come back to the studio, I can parse them out a bit more. And that's always been the case. When I was living in California, I used to joke that I was like a camel for the desert. Like, I would drink in desert inspiration in as much as I could at once, and then come back and kind of work off that for the next 6 to 12 months, and then get back out there. And now that I live here, I'm building a proper studio at my house now, and I've been ever finding a better studio to work in that blends the expanse of the wilderness with the legitimate needs of technology and clean power and all that kind of stuff. I'm from the film world as well. When it comes to music, I've been scoring film for the last 10 years, and that's a big part of it too. I think that way as a scorer. So it's the opposite for what you asked, where, it's not just like I'm making a sound and that's evoking a place. It's like I see a place and I need to make the sounds that are intrinsic to the emotional dimensions between the characters and the setting. And that's something that I don't want to leave out I think when I talk about this sometimes, it seems as though like I'm in this like pristine solitude. There's absolutely no people around, and it just sort of happens in this nature vacuum, but it never does. Like I'm influenced by the people who I meet on these journeys, and I'm influenced by the music that they make. There's mariachi, there's native music, there's amazing folk music, there's Celtic music that even comes through here. And I'm so inspired by the mix of cultures. And I also come from a lineage that I'm digging into quite a lot here in Santa Fe, and I'm Jewish, and there's actually a pretty profound Jewish community here, and there's a lot to learn about Jewish music here. Actually, my clarinet teacher does klezmer and is teaching me more about the historical foundations of the music of my people. And that's all working into an amalgamation of the sound of the place. And my intention is to be able to pass on a pretty accurate imprint of the sound of the place and the feeling of the place, this more intangible quality, and of course through the visuals, the look of this place, whether it's from the outside, the landscape, or from the psyche.
And when you are capturing these visual elements sonically, but are you also capturing them visually? Do you go out with a camera and film and capture the bison running? I know that's one of the images that you have.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a great example to start on. So the bison running that you are mentioning is the very famous Muybridge bison. So I believe he was a photographer who wanted to prove that a horse's hooves all left the ground at the same time. And in order to do that, he lined up 24 or so photographs and played them fast, and boom, that's one of our first animations on film. So the Muybridge experiments were, there's too many to count, but the ones that have really stuck with me are the horses running and the bison running. And thankfully, that is Creative Commons. It's public domain. So it's landed on my first EP cover, and it's a part of my show. Like, you see the bison running up there, and there are some things that are pulled from the archival world, which just have this wonderful, dusty, old film stock patina to them, which contributes to this sense of being back in time in some ways, but also being in this time and the absolute beauty of pristine nature and the stars and the forest and, the desert captured from a drone. And to answer your other question about whether I'm the one going out with the camera, that is one tool that I have not really learned yet. And I do have certain people I would love to mention. Daniel Johnson is a photographer and videographer who I've worked with extensively. And my wife, Gabriella, is also, she comes from a major film background and a film editing background. So we are in there editing a lot of this. She helps to put the live show together as well. So there's people behind the camera, there's people behind the scenes, as is always the case in film. What is wonderful about film is that you cannot possibly get away from the collaborative process, which I think is very important to me. Like going out there and just shooting myself out in the desert doesn't make, I don't know, it just sort of happens in a bottle, and it's just, okay, maybe that could go out to the world, but there's something that's really been emerging from these collaborative desert sessions. And with film will only get more and more collaborative, and that is a career path that I'm actively going into. So I will see and perhaps eat my words on the glories of collaborative filmmaking, because I'm so used to doing the music making on my own. But I think it's doing something very important, which is opening up the music collaborative process as well. That's been sealed for the entirety of Tone Ranger, except for when people come on to record a session, which I'm sort of directing what they play, or they're playing some sort of improvisational kind of thing. But yeah, film makes you collaborative, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, that's well said. I had a hunch that those were old, like, original photos from, I'm glad that you knew the true history and background of those. But if I recall correctly, I feel like I learned about those years ago. It is some of the earliest photographs.
Yeah, that's right. Not just film.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I went to, while I was taking music classes in college, I was taking film classes as well, and just loved those early films and the story of cinema from its beginnings, because it just seems so impossible to do without Final Cut Pro and a red camera these days.
Yeah.
But what those people could do is just absolutely incredible, and that aesthetic is consistent throughout my work, where I want to know the root of something. I want to know the foundational kernel that makes, whether it's music or the land and the stories of the land. I need to know, I need to have a more foundational knowledge. And so I'm bringing in this kind of foundational film work to take us to the root of it as close as I can get.
Yeah, well, that's beautifully said. When you are thinking in the auditory realm, you definitely have the strong background and training that, in your own words, you might say you have like the root of the note, or you know where things want to go. But I would articulate it in a way that you're adding things on top of it, or you are layering it or spreading it out, bringing it underneath other elements of the music. So how do you think about the width or the texture of a sound when you're creating
balance
stuff?
Balance is really a key word there as well in any discussion of texture. It needs to have the right balance of light and dark. It needs to have the right balance of good and evil, if you want to think of it that way, of distortion and cleanliness. Left and right is a great example. I mean, us producers, we're always considering the stereo field, and that the field is as wide as it is deep. So there's considerations of reverb and distance and things being, like that aren't the lead thing need to be quieter in the background in order for the clearest idea to be the foremost idea. Yeah, I mean, it's all about clarity, and of course there's no illusion. We're starting with nothing whenever we're opening up a blank track. We might have an idea, but it unfolds the way it does over time, over adding layers. Something that you learn as a producer, which is it's very hard as a multi-instrumentalist producer, is to restrain from adding too many layers, because you can easily cloud the sound with too many things, and you come up with something that no one can really see through. You want to show somebody a Magritte-like picture of the clouds from afar and give the sense of a mystery. You don't really want to be in the cloud for too long. There are parts of tracks where you're meant to be sort of like wrapped up in this ether, but even then, you don't want to take that out of focus for too long. I have learned.
So when you are starting out with a blank slate on Ableton, or sitting down and want to start a new song, where do you typically start? It's like asking a singer-songwriter where the sounds come from. I'd say it's different for every song. Sometimes I'm working from an idea, like I might have a scene in my head of a certain kind of scenario or a certain kind of environment. Or lightning is a fine example. Okay, so do I start with the sound of lightning, or do I start with something that embodies lightning, or is it something that embodies the feeling after lightning of waiting for the thunder to come and it's raining and then you hear the thunder? It depends song to song. Sometimes, I work with instruments, so sometimes it'll just pop out of the instruments. I would say if there's a majority case, it's that, and then maybe that will tether to some sort of idea or some sort of scene. I play a variety of instruments. A song that is started on the clarinet will have different rules and different fluidity to it than a song that starts out with chords on a guitar or drums or just a basic kick in the background. It's certainly a difficult question to articulate, because every song is certainly unique, and it all stems from creativity, and of course, where does that come from? But then ultimately, how do you capture it? So I appreciate you working with me and answering that question. As
sure. And maybe you could, if you're curious about a certain song, I could talk about where that one started.
Yeah, let's talk about Roadrunner. It's a great transition. So to me, it has like a really old Western vibe, and it's a bit slower than some of your other tracks.
Yeah.
But there are sounds that are very, I'll call wide or deep, and some of them seem to last for tens of seconds, and that's a long time in a given song. But it doesn't seem like it's a long time because the music is flowing, things are moving, but there's underlying textures that are kind of consistent. So yeah, maybe if you want to talk about Roadrunner and how that one came to be.
Yeah, that's a great one to start with, because the answer to that is both things, where it came totally from the world outside of music production and totally from a bass line that just, it was the right bass line. It was the right tempo. I was wanting to do something. The bass line was wanting to be low and slow, and visually in the mind's eye and in where I've been and where I live, I was just being taken to like desert casinos. Like it's just like it's this idea of a casino in the desert, which is so out of place. It's so out of harmony when you think of it from a natural resources perspective or anything. And yet there's something so alluring about it. There's something alluring about old Las Vegas. There's something about the lights and the glitz, and that is mimicked in synthesizers. And there are some casinos nearby Santa Fe, which is nearby also Los Alamos, which is where the atomic bomb was developed. So I haven't talked about this in public, but so you guys will be the first to hear. But the voices that you hear at the beginning are from Oppenheimer, who of course developed the bomb and was in charge of the Manhattan Project. And he's talking about his routine in going to the lab, and like he'd sometimes spend Saturday nights in Santa Fe with his wife. And I love that. Like, I love that it's this trivial, like, and here's what we do on the weekends. And I took my kids to school before I'd go off to develop the bomb. And something like that, it really helps to geolocate. So it helps me to think casinos, because that springboards me to think, oh, Los Alamos is close by. So it's like, it's of a world. So I should not step too far outside of the world. I should keep this contained, at the very least for me. Am I going to put a music video of this together, of that area, and like of a story happening in that area? Not so sure. But as long as the scenario is very clear to me, it will be very clear to you, because I'm obsessed at that point with getting something down to a fine point. And you really just need a motivation to get something down to a fine point, because that really is the hardest part, is to make it all legible at the end. And yeah, I mean, as long as it makes sense to me, then I'm going to pursue that clarity, so that you may not see exactly what I see, but you will see something similar to it. And when I play live, and when I bring up old casino footage from the public archives and I start spinning that through effect filters, I can definitely take you there. Like, film is yet another bridge to be able to plant the seed of an idea in somebody's mind. So to answer your question, it's both. It was very much a musical idea, and it was very much an idea that just came from the world, and a concept.
It's definitely a unique track. And there's one other track that definitely has a maybe a contrasting element to it, and that is Wavelength. I feel like there's a lot of energy behind this one, and forward momentum with some of the percussion elements. And I've got a few questions for you on that one. So first of all, when you're thinking through designing a soundscape, what are some of the approaches that you use on the technical end? So not on the mental end, but like once you've already kind of solidified how or
The
where
picture.
that track is going to take place, but how do you start to incorporate that through your instruments?
Through the instruments. So if I'm understanding right, you're not asking so much about, are you asking about the inspiration? How does the inspiration come through the instruments? Or how do I take the inspiration and how do I technically make the inspiration into anything?
Yeah, I would say more the latter. So I'm curious, given that you've evolved some sort of inspiration, how do you approach shaping the sound to match what is already going on underneath or behind the track?
Yeah, okay, so Wavelength is an interesting case because it's so much more of a dance forward track. There's no mistaking it for house adjacent, belongs on a dance floor. It's got a lot of sound design in it. It draws a lot from the archival film world that I'm dipping into visually, but yeah, I mean it's a track with a bass groove, with some vocal hooks, with drums, just unmistakable drum timing. Okay, the tambourine comes in now to give us some glitter, and the hi-hats just hit this way so that when we're on the dance floor, it's gonna hit this way. Like there's more of a guiding that I think I'm doing in a song like that, like a DJ might guide, where it's sure, it could be listened to in headphones in a relaxing chair, but it's probably going to be danced to. So there are certain rules for dance. I spoke earlier about the concept of the Adobe house. This is a house. It's got a framework. You got to lay down the foundations. There's a certain way that the walls are built. There's building code, I guess you could say. And there's all sorts of stretchy things that you can do. There's all sorts of decor that you can put in there. You can put a couple crystals in there, hang some house plants, but really you're in the house. So Wavelength is in the house, and at the very end I sort of break off from that, and you could even say at the very beginning there's more of a drawn out intro where you're in like fuzzy sub bass, feels like a spaceship might be taken off.
Yeah, is that a theremin? It sounds very distant. I was just curious.
A great magician never reveals his secrets.
Okay.
But I've revealed so many of mine that I'll do this one too. I don't know. I don't actually remember.
Okay, fair.
Which one are you talking about? The one that goes kind of like over the bass, like it's just got this like arc, high pitched arc.
It's definitely a high pitched arc. It sounds very wavelengthy, a range of a tone, So I just am curious, what goes through your mind and some of the approaches that you use.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as for approach, I am going to guess here, and I'm not trying to hide behind not revealing my secret, but you cannot remember every single sound that you record when a lot of the instruments are similar. I found I do have a theremin, and I do use a theremin on some tracks, but this one I believe was a patch on the Novation bass station. And for anybody wanting to get into the basics of understanding synthesizer and actually having a keyboard there to manipulate pretty basic parameters, that's a fantastic one and gives you fantastic usable results. I will never sell that synthesizer.
When did the lyrics come into that track?
Pretty early on. Like it was just a mantra. I think that with dance, you got to be careful not to crowd it with too much lyrical density. Depending on the lyrics, there are some stories that can be told very well over dance, and some things that I love that are done that way. But yeah, so this comes from the Follow the Sun EP, one instrumental, which is Roadrunner, one that's called Distance, that's more of a vocal sample, and then Follow the Sun and Wavelength, which can be summed up in one word each. And it's Go On, You Know Your Way, and Follow the Sun. And that was enough of a story for me. Follow the sun, go on, you know your way.
Well, it's definitely a unique track in my perspective, and it's one of my favorites. And so I'm curious, do you ever get surprised or thrown off by what ends up resonating with people? Because you might think that this track is going to take off, but a different one does. And I just wonder how you approach that, or if kind of the audience's response ever catches you off guard.
Yeah, I mean, I try to approach it with some equanimity. I try to have a sense of release. It's a good thing that they call it release when you release music, because you do need to release some control and some expectation over what's going to do what. Sometimes you're rooting for a track that doesn't do as well as a track that you weren't really rooting for. But that's just the name of the game. We're putting art out into the world. What can you possibly control over what people are going to think about it? You can only give it your best, make it the clearest that you can make it. But what happens with it is entirely up to the audience. And yes, I'm surprised by what really connects and what doesn't connect that I thought would connect. I'm very adamant. I used to be, when I was performing very often, like I said, when I was doing like 60 shows in the beginning in that first year, of just like really fine tuning to like, what does the crowd like in this instant? What note do they need right now? And just sort of like writing that down in my head and going back into the studio and this is what was working on this day, and having a more methodical approach to it. Nowadays I'm splitting my attention a lot onto what needs to be working. The visual field does take a lot of, like, it is the biggest learning curve by far right now in terms of what's working, what's not working. So I guess in a way I am still kind of in that process with the feedback from the world. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I would like to say, which is going through my mind a lot these days, is it may be good that the world is really resonating with something that you've put out because you put your heart and soul into it in the moment, but don't get too comfortable. Don't formalize yourself. Don't limit yourself in what else you can do. Okay, this worked. Don't make a ton of other things like this just so that they work. Because I didn't know that it would work when it first worked. Cheyenne is the first song that I released. It's the first song that I made when I started making house music. And therefore, I've learned a lot of things since then, but Cheyenne is just eclipsing everything else on Spotify. Like, it just like landed in the algorithm. It's doing better than anything. I can't just make a ton of tracks like Cheyenne just so that I could catch that high that I had when it was gaining momentum and, oh my God, cool, it's doing this thing out in the world. I should just make a ton like this and make everybody happy. I'm a composer. I make different things for different things. So I'm making house music today. I think I'll always kind of have that hat, but a time is going to come where I want to do things that are more orchestral. I want to do things that are more rock, and they fuse into this house that I make here, but they should be able to exist in their fullness too. So what people may expect from me will change, like any great artist. Picasso changed all the time. He had so many styles and just made so many pieces in so many styles and mastered so many styles. That's more inspiring to me than hanging my hat on house indefinitely.
Yeah, well, that's beautifully said, and I appreciate you articulating that it's not a formula, and you shouldn't try and formalize what has worked, because in my interpretation, it's very limiting, because then you are kind of stuck in the box.
You're stuck in your own box. You're stuck in the house that you made.
Yeah. That's important to keep exploring, to keep evolving and moving forward.
And important to love it too, and not disown it. That's incredibly important. Is not to look back at like, oh, I should have done that better. Or, oh, I shouldn't have made that. It's just
that's toxic.
Like you would not get to where you are now. Like I'll say that in the first person. I am where I am now, and I am having the compositional revelations that I'm having now because of everything that has led up to this. And everything is valid. Everything that's been made, okay, maybe some things some things from a long time ago when I was just starting, I just want to make sure that they're not online or accessible by anybody ever. But I'm still damn proud of them. But I'm still damn proud that I did. Yeah, you got to
own it.
Because I did have to do that in order to learn, whether it's learning songcraft or learning technical production. So it's all good. To anybody who is making things and feels stuck in their box, push out, have fun. But also don't stop yourself from stepping into a box. Like build a cool house, build something that people can come to. And it's amazing what people will teach you when they are ecstatic about what you're doing. There is nothing else like that in the world.
To that end, when do you know a song is done?
When it's due.
When it's due. So you give yourself a deadline?
Or somebody else gives me
external.
One. Yeah. So other people's deadlines tend to be less flexible than one's own. That's just true.
Yeah. It's easy to negotiate against yourself.
Oh, it's a piece of cake to negotiate against yourself. Yeah, I mean, you can negotiate cake with yourself. You can write anything off if you don't have some sort of internal boss of some kind, which I do and I don't. Like I wouldn't want to have a much firmer internal boss. I actually do like having things from the outside. Shows are a great example of this. Like you do need to get things ready for a show. You do need to rehearse for a show. And the show is happening on that day. And the show will not move no matter what. A show is actually like the firmest deadline that you can have, because you can argue with your agent too. And you could convince them too that there's just too much going on in my life right now. But yeah, I find shows to be wonderful, inarguable signposts, and album deadlines, song deadlines are like that. My wife and I run a record label called Anomalia Music, and it is nice to have from the inside and the outside nowadays accountability for when something must be done. And I will also say this, because I'm talking in a way that's very get things done. A song cannot be done, and a song could need more time, and you're not obligated to put that song out, unless you're like contractually obligated to do it, which could be a whole nother thing. If you feel like you must, for the benefit of the music and for the benefit of your artistic clarity and everything, don't drive yourself mad trying to finish something which cannot be done right now. I think most songwriters will tell you that they might pull up a song 16 years later that they wrote when they were 16. Paul McCartney took songs, 20 years from when he first wrote them, and that's constant. Not everything must be finished. Not everything can be finished in the time that you want it finished. Sometimes it's just up to the song. There's that perspective too.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a balance, but I appreciated both sides of that you articulated, so thanks for that. How do you tune your mind? How do you stay creative and approach life?
Well, I think it's a balance as well of bringing things in that help facilitate that and weeding things out that do not help facilitate that. I have had to. It's so funny. I just said weed things out because weed literally has been like the biggest one that I've had to weed out. 5 years ago, I will say, just before I started publishing music under Tone Ranger, like a good year before that, I stopped smoking weed, and that cleared up my mind a lot. Like I said, I came from the Bay Area, so it's just inevitable. And I was studying music when I was there, and I was smoking weed and jamming with my friends every weekend, and like just being in that kind of flow zone. And that was fantastic for a time until it did not help me clear anything up, did not help me sharpen my tools to a fine point, and I could not make what I needed to make with it. And it's at the point now, like I've abstained from several things, and weed is the only one that I actually feel called to abstain from indefinitely. It's not to say anything bad about weed. Certainly people will be listening right now who have a very strong relationship with it and can rely on it creatively and everything, and for balance and harmony in their life. It just became unreliable for me. So that's a microcosm example for all the other things that must go, that just consistently prove that they will not help me in regards to what does help me. I play basketball sometimes just to stay in shape and just to be moving around. These are things outside the music, but inside the music, I read guitar. I read Spanish guitar music every morning just to keep some regularity. And there's a meditation with that. There's also meditation, which I'm starting to formalize more of a daily practice around. That is helping a bit. I live in New Mexico. The trails out here are excellent. I'm able to get out of any kind of city or city-like, Santa Fe's version of a city kind of mindset, which can be, a city is stimulating and wonderful, but it can also be toxifying to a solitary creative practice, which really does need to be nurtured. And it is out here. I think I'm speaking to a lot of people in Colorado, but hey, wherever you are, there's nature nearby, and go out to it as much as you can, and just absorb it as much as you can, because these rhythms, these sounds, these movements, the smells, everything that you might be bringing into the music come from there. They always have. As for other things, I'm reading a bit these days, a bit of nonfiction. I'm catching up on history around the world, and that's helping me understand what's going on in the world. And okay, I can leave that outside the studio when it comes time. But yeah, it's been such a music zone these past 12 years that I've really had to make an effort to go outside of it and learn about other things, and it has a nice way of balancing everything. I will also say this: I have a 3.5-month-old daughter, and that is very new for me and very exciting and very everything. And that is helping me. It's helping me find ways to balance my time as well. And I mean, it might just sound obvious to everybody, but giving me a much higher purpose and understanding of what I'm doing all this for, and what this like how to hold myself up to be a stronger person. So that's helping in its way, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, well, I can certainly relate with a young daughter myself, and so many times I've heard people say, it changes life, it gives you a better perspective, it gives you more meaning, more purpose, but it's hard to really understand it until you're walking it.
Yeah, I think it might be easy to understand how it's impacting somebody else's life, but until it impacts your life, you really don't understand. Like, I don't understand what it is to be a father until I am a father. Yeah. That's how I am with everything, is like, I actually need to experience it to understand it. And, boy, I mean, just on a whole path of understanding and misunderstanding, I'm sure, moving forward.
Yeah. I recently saw a friend. She's got, I think, an 8-year-old son, and she was giving me some parental advice and stuff. But she said a phrase that I really appreciated, and that is that your kids are a mirror for yourself. And of course, that mirror will evolve over time. But it's certainly interesting when I see certain tendencies or actions and behaviors. I'm like, wow, I definitely see myself in that. So
well. Yeah, I mean, if it's a mirror for me, then I guess I'm crying more than I realized, and I'm cuter than I realized.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, well, that mirror will keep evolving, that's for sure. So, I wanted to close up with a few questions here, and
sure,
just one that's outside of music, or maybe it is involved in music. But what is a favorite book, quote, or message that has most impacted your life?
So I read The Alchemist a few years ago, when I was getting deep into a larger project, which I'm still working on. And I thought that I was done with, there's the baby. I thought that I was done with what I was doing. I thought I was rounding the corner. And I read this passage in The Alchemist right as the boy, the protagonist in the story, is helping change things in the crystal merchant shop, and the crystal merchant is just like coming into a certain kind of affluence that he never has, and he's afraid of it. He's afraid of the wave of success that's going to come, and he says, this is at the very end of part 1 going into part 2. Sometimes there's just no way to hold back the river. And in my project, I was holding back the river. Like, I was on dry land, and I knew that there was something deeper. So the larger project is called Peaks and Valleys. And I think I had focused way more on the peaks than the valleys. And I think I had neglected to do a level of soul searching that I didn't think was necessary for this project. And like I said, I'm still working on it right now. Desert Rose, which has come out most recently, is part 1 of 4. I thought I was just doing an album, but I'm doing 4 albums. I'm doing a cycle. Wow. And I'm doing a whole visual world with it and everything. But there's just no way to hold back the river. If that's what's coming through, if that's what you need, if that's what you're looking for, then let it through. As I was saying earlier, it's so easy to get kind of stuck in your success and stuck in what's working, and do the minimal requirements that the modern world is cool with. Okay, you release a track, you release a little collab, you do a little remix, put a few songs together. I want to do large arc storytelling through music in a genre that sometimes like I think that dance music is as deep as the world, but sometimes it can be approached in a trivial manner. And what has been shown to me this whole time is it's only as trivial as you make it. Like you can make it as deep as you want it to be. The valleys can go all the way down, and maybe they're supposed to if you want to go all the way up.
Well, for people listening out there today, if they don't already know your music, what are the best platforms and networks to connect with you on and to keep up to date with your tour schedule and upcoming albums?
Yeah, I would say if people want to get a peek at the visual world that's coming out in snippets, I would say go to my Instagram handle at Tone Ranger Music. The website that I live on is the domain of my music label, and that is Casa on Amalia, CASA, like the house, on Amalia, like the kingdom.com. And by the time this comes out, hopefully there's going to be some richer material on YouTube as well for deeper dives into the sonic visual world.
Last questions for you. It's open-ended. Is there anything else that you would like to share today?
I think I shared it pretty good, and there's a baby crying right outside, and I better go tend to baby, tend to mama.
Great. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time here today. I appreciate you revealing some of the inspiration behind your tracks and how you're able to incorporate the visual into the full experience. So really look forward to what you're putting out, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.
Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music. You are listening to Freio Music.